Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be starting a new series on this channel in which we take a look at various gubernatorial and Senate elections for the 2022 midterm cycle. And I thought I'd start off with an interesting state. I wanted to start off with the state of Utah because this is a race that I've normally categorized as safe Republican, but it's a very interesting race nonetheless, and I want to talk about it because Utah is one of those interesting states in politics where even though it's a safe Republican state, they tend to like more moderate Republicans, more of the Romney type of Republicans. This is very rare in a Republican base nowadays. And we're going to take a look at a couple of election results and polling that kind of highlight this difference between Utah as a safe red state and these other races. So we're going to take a look at the general election first between Mike Lee, the incumbent Republican senator running for a third term, and the independent Evan McMullin, who sort of ran as a neoconservative, sort of George Bush type Republican back in 2016 to kind of win over the Republicans that thought Trump was not really palatable with their political philosophy. And in 2016, he got 21% of the vote in the state. Donald Trump only getting 45% of the vote. Hillary Clinton just a mere 27%. So even despite this abysmal margin for Donald Trump, the state of Utah still went safe in his category because he beat Hillary Clinton by nearly 20 percentage points, about 18 points, despite a large amount of Republicans jumping ship and voting for Evan McMullin. Now, in 2016, on that same exact ballot, Mike Lee demolished his Democratic opponent, getting 68% of the vote and winning back a lot of these counties that had swung away from Trump on the presidential ballot. Of course, you have Utah County, one of the reddest counties in the state, 82% of the vote going to Mike Lee, Donald Trump just getting a little bit over 50%. Other populated areas like Salt Lake City, Donald Trump doing, again, pretty poorly, 32% of the vote. Davis County, 44%. If we take a look at Mike Lee, he massively outperforms Donald Trump. Now, Mike Lee back in 2016 was pretty different than the way he is now. He was much more of an anti-Trump Republican when he ran back in 2016. Didn't endorse Trump, I'm pretty sure, in the presidential election, or he did and then backtracked or something like that. He was very wishy-washy on Donald Trump, to say the least. But once Trump got in office, he became much more of a staunch Trump ally until now, of course, in the present day. He's considered one of Trump's strongest allies in the Senate. Now, if we take a look at 2020, a lot of the Utah Republicans came home to the Republican Party, with Donald Trump getting 58% of the vote, but Joe Biden had the best performance for a Democrat in the state since 1964 when Lyndon Johnson won the state outright in the presidential election. So there has been a massive shift in Utah in the past 4 years or so, and mainly focused in on the Salt Lake City area and the more populated counties in Utah. Utah is one of the youngest states in the country, so it's not really a surprise that you see this lurch to the left, but I think a lot of this still comes from their disdain for President Trump as a person, because of course, when you look at the more moderate Republicans on the ballot, somebody like Spencer Cox, for instance, he does a lot better than Donald Trump does in Utah. So Utah is a very interesting state. They tend to like more moderate, quote-unquote, compassionate conservatives. You know, Spencer Cox is very liberal on a number of issues, LGBT issues, things like that, for the Republican Party. So he is more of a libertarian, but he does have that sort of liberal bent to him on a number of issues. So Utah Republicans generally like that in their candidates. They like the more soft-spoken, presentable Republican candidates. Many of them now see Mike Lee as much more of a MAGA-type Republican, which really isn't in their vein. And that brings me, of course, to the next poll I want to take a look at. This was done by Deseret News, and the poll basically asked, are you more of a Trump Republican or a Romney Republican? And if we take a look at the results, the question was, in thinking about these two prominent Republicans, who best represents your political and policy preferences? Mitt Romney gets 51%, Donald Trump just 37%, 12% other. Now, this poll was conducted with just Utah voters, period. So not Republicans, not independents, just Utah voters in general. 51% liked Mitt Romney's style of politics, 37% Donald Trump's, 12% other. Those are probably more left-wing voters, don't like Mitt Romney or Donald Trump. But if you take a look at the results for Utah Republicans, the results basically flip, where 51% see Trump as their ideal Republican candidate, just 42% Romney. But that 42% is still a large force in Utah Republican politics. And that's why I wanted to tie it back into this Senate race, because Mike Lee didn't do as great in his Republican primary as you would expect from an incumbent Republican senator. He only got 62% of the vote. Becky Edwards, who was running to the left of him, got about 29.7%. And then you have Ali Isom, I think is how you say her name, at about 8%. So ultimately not really a good showing, but there are independents and Democrats who register as Republicans who vote in these primaries. So it's not necessarily the worst news in the world, but it does highlight a weakness that Mike Lee has with the Republican base in Utah. The fact that 42% of Utah Republicans think Mitt Romney better represents their philosophy than somebody like Donald Trump, or probably to an extent Mike Lee himself as well. So that's why we go back to this Senate race, because Evan McMullin has been running this sort of Romney-esque kind of campaign, and Mitt Romney himself has actually refused to endorse either of the candidates in this race, kind of hinting that he's not really a big fan of Mike Lee, but doesn't want to lose the Republican Party as a whole by endorsing somebody like Evan McMullin. But McMullin is sort of banking on these Republicans that are the Romney type of Republicans, and of course Democrats, to vote for him in November, because that would really be his only chance at winning in this election. Now, if we look at the general election polling, we only have one recent poll, two recent polls rather. One of them is an internal from the Mike Lee campaign, which has him up 52-33 over Evan McMullin. And then another one is among registered voters by Dan Jones and Associates, which has Mike Lee with more of a narrow lead, only beating Evan McMullin by about 6 points or so. So I don't really think any of these polls are particularly that reliable. Again, it's very hard to poll in a safe red state like Utah, but it does highlight a weakness that Mike Lee might have among the Republican base. But I think as this campaign goes on, Evan McMullin will likely fall in the polling because he is running more to the left. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, he basically said that that was the wrong decision, which back in 2016, he had tweeted out that he was the pro-life candidate running in the 2016 presidential election against Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. So he's backtracked on a number of policy positions in an effort to win over Democrats to vote for him in 2022. Now, I don't doubt that 95% of Democrats will end up voting for McMullin anyway. They're not fans of Lee. Of course, they're going to vote for somebody other than him. But Evan McMullin is really counting on that 42% of Republicans to vote for him over somebody like Mike Lee. But I think the vast majority of those are also going to vote for Mike Lee. So ultimately, I think this race is still safe Republican, as I've highlighted here. There's a number of interesting nuances in this race. Again, Utah Republicans are a lot different than national Republicans. It's much more moderate than the rest of the country. Now, this could really just be because of the fact that you had Donald Trump back in 2016, and there's still a large chunk of the Republican base that is kind of repelled by him. So in a post-Trump political environment, would Utah go back to the way it was voting, say, in 2012, or would it continue to trend more to the left with younger voters, leaving the Republican Party, even leaving Mormonism to a lesser extent in Utah? So that is interesting, and that is something to look at in the future. But ultimately, I think this is a safe race for Mike Lee. But I did want to highlight it because Utah is a very interesting state, to say the least, when it comes to politics. But I do think Mike Lee overall probably will win this election with about anywhere from 59 to about 63% of the vote at the end of the day. I just think most Republicans will end up coming home to the Republican Party and voting for Mike Lee. It could get closer. I'm just saying, as of right now, that's the way it looks. His primary performance wasn't exactly encouraging, but I would bet that a lot of people in that primary that voted against Mike Lee were going to vote against him in the general anyway. So in a weird way, that was almost like a precursor to the general election. At the end of the day, I think Mike Lee does have a surprisingly strong performance in Utah compared to where the polls have him, because of the red wave environment that we're likely to see in 2022. So anyway, guys, thank you all for watching this video. Please leave a thumbs up down below if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. And again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.